This is the end, my only end, my friends.
This is the worst.
Motazita Banakasi, welcome into the worst fantasy show. I am your host with the least, Jack Lucenay, coming to you this one last final time on this Monday in this year of 2024. That is right. We are wrapping up the reaction shows for the remainder of the fantasy football season. Now that the fantasy football regular season is over, we will be focusing exclusively on the Thursday matchup show and the Sunday question show. So we will be down to 2 a week, but we'll be here for the two most important shows to help you get through your fantasy football playoffs. But for one last time, we are here to run through all of the guys that got you to the fantasy football playoffs and all the guys that let you down. It's the hearts and the farts, and we always like to start on the positive side of life. So we are starting with this week's edition of the Hearts. At the quarterback position, there was nobody more studly than Joshua Allen, who went 3 for 3, the first time in history that is 3 passing touchdowns and 3 rushing touchdowns. He dominated your fantasy football matchups. You were hard-pressed to lose this week if you had Josh Allen as your fantasy football quarterback. But right behind him was Sam Darnold, continuing his renaissance season with 5 touchdowns. Also, rounding out your top 10, you had Joe Burrow, Jared Goff, Tua Tagovailoa, Brock Purdy, Matt Stafford, Kyler Murray, Jalen Hurts, Baker Mayfield at 24.3 fantasy points. And then you had a big drop-off because number 11 was Russell Wilson with a whole 19.8 fantasy points. At the running back position, we have our shout-out of the week.
Thanks, Jamal.
None this guy.
None this guy.
Finishing number 1 fantasy running back of week 14 and helping me out in several leagues, including my main $150 redraft league, Zach Charbonnet, powering teams to the fantasy football playoffs, as did Isaac Garendo, who now unfortunately is dealing with injuries. So we'll talk about that a little bit later in the show. You also had Josh Jacobs, Rashad White, Kyron Williams, Chase Brown, James Conner, Bijan Robinson, Chuba Hubbard, Rico Dowdle, Saquon Barkley, continuing the march to 2,000 yards. David Montgomery, Tyrone Tracy, Jahmyr Gibbs, Aaron Jones, Tony Pollard, Devon Achane, and Najee Harris scored a touchdown. From the wide receivers, Jamar Chase continues to prove that he is the number 1 fantasy dominator from the wide receiver position, dropping a near 50 burger for fantasy points. Had like 175 yards and 2 tutties. Jordan Addison had 3 monster touchdowns. Puka Nacua had a big game. Justin Jefferson also had 2 touchdowns. You had Khalil Shakir, Jawan Jennings, Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams, Jalen McMillan with double touchdown. Probably don't chase this one. CeeDee Lamb, Tim Patrick also in the 2 touchdown club this week. Darnell Mooney had a big game. Roma Dunes double touchdown club. Cooper Kupp, JSN, Garrett Wilson, Waddle, Thielen, BTJ, Amari, all kind of in that PPR club. And then you had Jerry Jeudy, Quentin Johnston, Devontae Smith, and Nuke, DeAndre Hopkins, all in the touchdown club. They caught touchdowns and they were useful. At the tight end position, George Kittle, David Njoku, Pat Freiermuth, Jawan Johnson, Jonnu Smith, Tucker Kraft, Trey McBride, Michael Mayer with 7 for 68. Cade Otton found his way on this list, kind of just barely serviceable. And Grant Calcaterra caught a touchdown, subbing in for Dallas Goedert. And finally, your fantasy defense of the week, the 49ers, with only 19 fantasy points. A very bad week for fantasy defenses across the board. The rest of the list, you have the New York Giants with just 17, the Jaguars, the Saints, the Titans. All of those were streaming options that we had on the show. They weren't a lot, but they were still your 3, 4, 5 performing fantasy defenses on the week. And then you also had the Steelers, as well as the Bucs and the Raiders. But it's one thing to stay positive and talk about the guys that, uplifted us, but I think we all in fantasy tend to remember the guys that let us down, and so let us get into the farts.
Come on, don't bullshit me.
Bullshit.
Bullshit. Bullshit. Bullshit.
Bullshit. You said so bullshit.
Geno Smith, Patrick Mahomes, Derek Carr and his broken hand, Justin Herbert, Kirk Cousins, and Caleb Williams all hovered around between 15 and 10 fantasy points. And the guys who really marked you in super flex leagues, if you had the unfortunate chance of playing them, which I actually played one of these guys in multiple leagues, Aiden O'Connell left in an air cast. Suddenly, it seems like he's not going to miss the rest of the season. But also Will Levis and Mac Jones were major disappointments. At the running back position, Alvin Kamara with a rather mediocre game. He was vultured by Kendre Miller. That's something we're going to have to pay attention to going forward now. Braylon Allen was a common sub for a lot of people. He was someone grabbed off waivers, shoved into lineups, especially in this week with so many teams on bye. Unfortunately, didn't really work out, not especially as compared to Zach Charbonnet. Travis Etienne continues to be a major dud. Jalen Warren is essentially a non-factor except in the deepest of leagues. You had Isaiah Pacheco, Kareem Hunt, Nick Chubb, and Jerome Ford, DeAndre Swift, James Cook. The James Cook disappearing act was a very scary one because if the Buffalo Bills are trailing and they're just going to lean on Ty Johnson in the passing game, James Cook could feasibly be phased out of the game plan. I think there's going to be a little bit of an overcorrection this week, so hopefully James Cook bounces back. But this was a scary thing to see him on this list with such a low opportunity count. And Bucky Irving, that one a little bit more predictable. I kind of saw that coming, unfortunately, with the injuries he was already dealing with. I even said Rachaad White was a solid play, so that was just one that was a rough outing if you happen to play Bucky Irving, who also left with a back strain, who was already dealing with other injuries. Albert, my man, I see you in the comments. What's up? The wide receiver position for your duds. Drake London, just 5 for 70. Mike Evans in a plus matchup against the Giants. Only 4 for 69. Saw both his touchdowns go to Jalen McMillan. You had Amon-Ra St. Brown, 5 for 43, but he gets the Buffalo Bills, so he should be in a plus matchup and should bounce back. DJ Moore was dealing with a quad all week. I actually sat him in my main money league. 6 for 49. MVS, NWH, the law firm, no touchdown this week. And DK Metcalf, we had talked about this. I stole this stat from the Fantasy Footballers, but DK Metcalf in his entire career, we vetted it on the Sunday show, has never gone over 60 yards against the Arizona Cardinals, and that remains true. DK Metcalf in his entire career has never gone over 60 yards against the Arizona Cardinals, just 4 for 49. I benched him and DJ Moore this week. It was in favor of Brian Thomas Jr. and Zach Charbonnet. So I definitely made the right decision there. Charbonnet and my flex saved me this week. Though I was facing the last place team, I basically was going to win no matter what. Plus the other two teams I needed to lose. They actually both lost. So even if I had lost, I would have made playoffs. Nobody gives a shit about my fantasy league, though. For the rest of the wide receivers, A.J. Brown was disappointing and disappointed. If you saw the press conference, he seemed pissed off. I feel an overcorrection coming for A.J. Brown. He's going to have a monster game, I think, pretty soon. It could be this week against Pittsburgh, actually, because they're a really tough run defense. So Saquon could have some tougher sledding. I could see A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith both having huge games this week. Deebo Samuel continues to just be a non-factor. Keenan Allen struggled. And T. Higgins, disappearing act. It was just all Jamar Chase. And now we get to our tight end position. And oh my, do we have a special one this week for you guys.
Who scored more than Kyle Pitts this week?
So last year, if you guys were around, we did a poem to close out the year of who scored more than Kyle Pitts. Fortunately for us, he had a bad week last year. And fortunately, he's had a bad week again this year. So I wrote another poem. And this one is called 'Twas the Night Before Pittsmas. 'Twas the night before Pittsmas, when all through the house not a calcaterra was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the stone smart with care, in hopes that Luke Schoonmaker would soon be there. The children were nestled, all snug in their beds, while visions of Tyler Conklin danced in their heads. And Noah Fantastic and Drew Sample in a winter cap had just settled down for a long winter's nap. When out on Hunter Long there arose such a clatter, I approached the window with a Tommy tremble to see what was the matter. Away to the window I peered out for a Josh while, peeking through the curtains across the Julian Hill. The moon on the Noah gray of that fresh fallen snow struck through the scene like Chigoconquo, when what to my wondering eyes should appear but a miniature sleigh with 8 tiny Michael Mayer, with a little old driver so lively and quick. I knew in a moment it must be Mike Gesicki. More rapid than the eagles, his coursers they came, and he whistled and shouted, and he called them by name. Now Fryermuth, now Kraft, now Ryman, now Bellinger, now Jonu, now Jawan, and Joku, and Oliver. To the fantasy football playoffs, to the windows, to the walls, to the sweat drip down my balls. Oh, skeet, skeet, motherfucker. Oh, skeet. He sprang to his sleigh, to his team gave a whistle, and away they all flew like a burro to a Hudson. But I did hear him exclaim, as he dropped a goose out of sight, Merry Pittsmas to all, and to all a good fucking night.
Merry Christmas, you filthy animal.
That's the best one I've ever done, by far. Holy shit. The rest of the tight ends that disappointed you, besides Kyle Pitts, I didn't even write them down. I wrote that whole poem about Kyle Pitts, and then I forgot to write the rest of the disappointing tight ends. So let's just move on. The defenses, there was the Buffalo Bills scored negative points. The Cardinals, fucking Cardinals.
Go fuck yourself.
That's my missed call of the week. We've been really good with the defenses, the streaming defenses on this show this year. 3 out of the 4 that we named were in the top 5. Hopefully you did not end up with the Cardinals, who ended up in the bottom 5. The Bears, the Dolphins, and the Eagles rounded out the list of the terrible, disappointing defenses. Whoa. We got a question before we get into waivers. Billy Bob in a Dynasty League. I traded K9 Godwin and Akine for Derrick Henry. Cool. Obviously, it's playoffs, but keep in mind, it's Dynasty, our league rules, no trade deadline. Do you think this is fair? Yeah. I mean, it's fair on both sides. If you're a competing team, you get Derrick Henry. If you're not a competing team, you get Kenneth Walker, who's a younger running back in a decent situation. Godwin, Obviously, season-ending injury, but is young enough that he should still come back and have some kind of a career. And Westbrook-Akine for depth. I think this is a very even trade. So, yes, it is very fair, Bailey Bob. Speaking of, though, let's get into the waiver wire for your fantasy football playoffs.
The fuck? The fuck? The fuck is in the air. The fuck? There's white shit everywhere. The fuck? I must be fucking baked and this shit's probably fake. The fucking hell did I just take? The fuck?
You don't need them. No, for real. For the most part, I think if you're heading into your fantasy football playoffs, if you are a 1 through even a 4 or 5 seed with as much parity as I have seen this year, you're probably okay. You should be looking at adjusting very small things like maybe improving your fantasy kicker, maybe in getting a second defense at a week ahead so that you're not having to scrounge on the waiver wire with everybody else. When you're in kind of that top seed area, that's from the standpoint that you should be operating. However, if you are one of these bottom seeds, right, and you just squeak through, some of these names are going to be important. The most important thing you're going to want to do is look at the 6 teams that were on bye week last week and look at some of their more important auxiliary ancillary players. So just an easy example off the top of my head, the Atlanta Falcons, Tyler Algier. You might see him have hit some waivers. Justice Hill is another one. Back up to Derrick Henry. Obviously, the Ravens were on bye. Even in shallower leagues, if Rashad Bateman hit waivers, things like that. Isaiah Likely, even in really deep leagues. So just keep an eye on, again, who may have hit waivers. But for quarterbacks, kind of presumably in single quarterback leagues, Jameis Winston, I think the matchup against Kansas City only looks bad on paper. I'm totally fine with it, the way that he's been slinging it around. I like Jameis. I like Russ against Philadelphia in the Battle of Pennsylvania. I think that could be a little bit more of a shootout, actually. I literally saw CJ Stroud hit waivers. Again, single quarterback leagues, at this point in the year, he's been bad enough that I get it. But if I'm in a situation where I'm a team that just lost Derek Carr, or I've been trying to stream quarterbacks and struggling with my decisions, I might just take the easy 15 from CJ Stroud at this point. So just, again, crazier things have happened. And this was a very competitive league. You're like, Jack, how is that even possible? This was a Megala Bowl. Like, Megala Bowl tournament is a tournament run by the fantasy footballers. And again, when you look at the name value, you're like, how the hell could that happen? But he has underperformed the entire year and was just coming off a bye. It wouldn't completely shock me if in your 10-man home league, Stroud hit waivers. Just keep an eye on it. Maybe go see if you could pick that up. Drake May was just on bye also. He might have hit waivers. But otherwise, you're looking at like your Aaron Rodgers, your Cooper Rush. And in Superflex leagues, you're dead in the water at this point. If you don't have a second quarterback, you should just be playing your best running back or wide receiver in that Superflex spot. But for the sake of argument, Jake Haener and Desmond Ridder are going to be taking over, theoretically speaking, for Aiden O'Connell, who is now maybe going to play in Week 15. I don't know what's going on with that. But Derek Carr is probably for sure done for the season. So Jake Haener is the safer ad even out of those two quarterbacks. I do see a couple comments. I'll hit that before we end the show right after I finish up the waivers, all right? Running backs. Do we trust Patrick Taylor, who is at this point the 5th running back on the depth chart for the San Francisco 49ers? I personally do not. They called him up from the practice squad, and it's a Thursday matchup. I really hate that it's a Thursday matchup. I think I would feel better about it if it was not. So I don't know that I'm trying to just stick him in my lineup again. There's no bye weeks. You should have better plays. Javonte Williams, Justice Hill, Tyler Algier, Kendre Miller even should be thrown definitely on your bench. I saw Javonte Williams hit waivers in a couple leagues, and I get it because he's been kind of in a three-way split with Estime and McLaughlin, but I would still just almost throw him. He seems like a landmine player, so if you have the room, maybe throw him on the back end of your bench just to have some depth, but don't feel like you need to prioritize it. And then McNichols and Rodriguez, both again coming off the bye week. Brian Robinson is active now. So really, I don't know that they're both going to be viable as more than kind of spot start handcuffs. I think a more interesting case can be made for Ty Johnson and Sean Tucker. Ty Johnson is game script dependent when the Buffalo Bills seem to be down in passing situations. Sean Tucker, if Bucky Irving is declared out ahead of time, then he is definitely going to see that second load of touches behind Rachaad White. And I think he could be a viable spot start again if you're dealing with like injuries or something, like you just desperately need a running back. I actually think Sincere McCormick has been getting enough volume to be a solid RB2. So you might want to turn that way instead. And just because of the matchup and because Breece Hall could potentially miss another game, Isaiah Davis, again, very deep leagues, you're in a 16-teamer, you just squeezed into the playoffs and you're looking for a high upside spot start, I think he could be it. For the wide receivers, the Chargers are back in our lives with Quentin Johnson and Josh Palmer. Jalen McMillan, rookie for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, pop up with 2 touchdowns. I don't think you can trust that. I don't know if I would chase it. Devon Bailey, the old rookie for the Denver Broncos. I think Elijah Moore is probably a safer play. I look at Dontavian Wicks if Romeo Doubs misses another week. I look at Giants wide receiver, whether that's Wan'Dale Robinson or Darius Slayton. Both should have positive matchups. And maybe Ricky Pearsall, kind of worth a deep look. Again, it's a Thursday matchup, though, and I'm trying to stay away from the Thursday matchups, I think. And then Tim Patrick in kind of, again, deep leagues. David Moore kind of enters that discussion. But for the most part, especially at wide receiver, you should be well off enough this week that you don't have to use any of these guys. For tight end, Jawan Johnson, Hunter Henry, Cole Kmet. Cole Kmet, unfortunately, is a complete dart throw. I think Hunter Henry is very clearly the best name out of all of these. However, he has a really bad matchup this week. So just kind of, brace yourself and set yourself low for expectations. Jawan Johnson would have been a much better ad, I think, if it was still Derek Carr. But obviously now he's downgraded to Jake Haener. But I still think could be worth a spot start. Jatavian Sanders is coming back. And Dan Bellinger also popping up. Theo Johnson officially on IR for the Giants. So, maybe Dan Bellinger in a really, really deep tight end premium leagues. The real teams that you're going to be identifying, especially in the playoffs, defense. I'm looking at these teams with injuries, with backup quarterbacks. So obviously the Washington Commanders are going to be an excellent matchup. They're going to be playing against the New Orleans Saints. The New York Jets, as rough as a season as it has been for the Jets, the defense has kind of been serviceable. And against the Jaguars, you're looking at Mac Jones. So I think that's a serviceable matchup. I think the Bengals are actually a really great matchup against the Titans. Because Will Levis, obviously, I'm assuming it's still going to be Will Levis. If it is Mason Rudolph, I feel not as good about that because the Bengals defense hasn't been that great this year. But if it is Will Levis, I'm definitely willing to take that chance. And the Falcons. The Falcons defense has been very hit or miss, but against the Raiders, who are absolutely woeful, if Aiden O'Connell misses and it's supposed to be the Desmond Ridder revenge game, I think that could actually have a reverse effect. And so there's a good possibility that they're a good play. Billy Bob, my league is giving hell for it. I'm 13-1, but we changed the playoff team range from 6 to 8 in the middle of year, which is unfair in my opinion. I'm going against the 6 and 8 team, and K9 is injured. Yeah, see, okay, there's so many pet peeves of mine happening here, Billy Bob. The guy traded with his out, but he needs guys for next year, which is what Dicey is all about. Yeah, no, exactly. So, look, just to go back here real quick, and I've I'm officially on the stance that Dynasty Fantasy Football is the worst version of fantasy football that exists. It never ends, and you always have these kinds of issues with, oh, but the trade isn't fair. Fuck you. Straight, like, sorry. I get really upset with shit like this. I've literally gone through it in my own league this year, and it was a redraft where when other managers, and I really hate when the commissioner does this, obviously, but when other managers start to evaluate the fairness of a trade, it's like, you don't know anything. The trade I tried to make earlier this year was Tyreek Hill for DJ Moore and Calvin Ridley. And you know what? To this point, DJ Moore and Calvin Ridley have actually outscored Tyreek Hill by a serious margin of fantasy points. Like, it has not been close on who won that trade in a redraft for the last, 10 weeks. Tyreek Hill is only now just starting to have good weeks again. So, yeah, I really hate when people, try to evaluate the fairness of a trade, especially in a dynasty format, because in 2 years, if Derrick Henry is dust and Kenneth Walker is still in the league, that's totally a fair trade. People have no idea what they're talking about in dynasty leagues. So I would just ignore your league. They're just mad that you are a top seed that just locked up Derrick Henry and probably the championship. You did nothing wrong. Kudos to you, and I wish you the best of luck on hoisting your championship, Billy Bob. And I wish the best of luck to every single one of you out there watching that has watched at any point this season. Thank you so much for hanging around on this final Hearts and Farts reaction show of this year of 2024. The last show like this that we'll do, at the very, very end of the season, we will do an award show at some point. But for the remainder of the season, we'll be down to Thursdays and Sundays. So Thursdays usually at 7. Sometimes we'll do Fridays. And the Sunday show is always at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So I wish you guys all the best of luck in your fantasy football playoffs. Hopefully you make it to your championships. And I will catch all of you guys on the flip side.
He's running down the middle by the 50. He's at the 30. He's bare-chested and banging his chest. Now he runs the opposite way. He runs at the 50. He runs at the 40. The guy is drunk, but there he goes. The 20. They're chasing him. They're not going to get him. Waving his arms, bare-chested. Somebody stop that man. Here comes